What are undesigned coincidences? Undesigned coincidences are probably the most powerful evidence of the historicity and reliability of the Gospels as stories that were written from eyewitnesses. Today, we're going to encounter the first undesigned coincidence in the Synoptic Gospels. So stay tuned until the end of the video. Read Mark 1:19. Kai probasso ligon, eiden Jacobon, ton tu Zebedaio, kai Ioannen, ton del phonautu. Kai eutus entoploio cartizantas ta dictua. This long sentence starts with a participle, probas, and then the verb eiden, which is the main verb of the sentence. The subject is Jesus. So Jesus, after probas, eiden, verb, who? The object. Jacobon, this is object number one, and this is the specification. Who was Jacobon? Ton tu Zebedaio. This is a genitive. Okay, so this specify who Jacobon was. Kai and Ioannen. This is object number two. So these are the two people that Jesus aided, that Jesus saw, Jacobon and Ioannen. And this is the specification of Ioannen. So the first specification is related to object one, Jacobon. The second specification, ton de phonatou, is related to Ioannen. Kai, so this is the last part of the sentence. Autus refers again to Jacobon and Ioannen. What were they doing? Well, this is another participle here that specify what they were doing. So he saw them doing something. Katartizanta, where, and toploio, so this is the place where these two guys were, and they were katartizanta, what? Tadictua. So this is the object related to the verb katartizantas. So let's start translating from the very beginning. Kai is the usual conjunction, and probas, we saw, is the participle. It's actually an aorist participle and comes from the verb probino. Probino. Now, the verb probino, you said, it's a combination of two pieces. One is the preposition pro, and the other is the verb bino. Now, the verb bino, it's very common in Greek, just means to go, to walk. And the preposition pro means generally for. It can mean different things. It can mean before, it can mean forth, it can mean forward. In this case, pro bino means to go forward, okay, forward. So, and after walking forward, after moving forward, after going forward, oligon. What is this oligon? Well, oligon comes from an adjective, which is oligos, which means little, literally little, or a few, little or a few. Think about English words that start with the root oligo. For example, oligarchy. It's a government where the power is in the hands of a few people, right? Now, in this case, oligon is conjugated in this omicron new ending, which makes it not an adjective, but it turns it into an adverb. Adverb. So what this means is that Jesus had moved forward a little bit. Okay. So after calling Peter, that's what he did. And walking forward a little bit, Aiden, he saw. We already saw this verb in the past. We're not going to dwell further. He saw whom? Well, we know James and John. Let's find those in the text. The first guy that Jesus sees after seeing and calling Andrew and Peter is, Mark says, Jacobon, ton tu Zebedaio. Let's start from the specification. Ton to Zebedaio. You see this omicron nu. This is because it's an object. Okay, so they're the clans at the accusative case masculine singular. Ton is the definite article, the. Okay, so it agrees with the accusative case. So he saw Jacobon, ton, the what? Well, there's nothing that agrees with Omicron nu. You see that tu, zebedayu, this is a genitive. Okay, they're both genitive. So the what? Well, it's understood. Okay, when there's no specification, and especially there's a genitive related to the father, is because this is the son. Okay, the son. So Jacobon was the son of whom? To Zebediah, of Zebedee. All right. Now, who is this Jacobon? Well, you would tell me, well, that's James, right? Well, let's spend some time to understand why Jacobon turned into James in English. Now, the Greek name Jacobos is just an Hellenization of the Hebrew name Yaakov. And Yaakov in Hebrew is a name that is not even a great name, to be honest, because it means literally the supplanter, the one that comes from behind and takes your place and trips you maliciously to take your place, the supplanter. Now, apart from this, this is the Greek name, which is basically a literal transliteration of the Hebrew Yaakov. How did we move from Yaakov to James? So the story is quite interesting. So we start from the Hebrew Yaakov and its Greek version Yaakobos. And then we should get to the English Jacob, right? That would be the simple, obvious transliteration of the Greek Jacobos, Jacob. And in fact, the son of Isaac in the Bible was called Yaakov, and in English is translated as Jacob. We have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not James, right? Well, guess what? James' name, James, the apostle of Jesus, had exactly the same name of the son of Isaac, Yaakov. So why is that Jacob called Jacob and this Jacob called James? Well, the story gets even more complicated than this if we think that Jacob ended up being James in English, but if you think about, for example, Spanish, the poor Jacob turned out to be Santiago. And in Italian, poor Jacob turned out to be Giacomo. So, what's the name of this guy? Was it Jacob, Jacob, James, Santiago, Giacomo? What is that? Well, what happened was that from the Greek Jacobos, we got to the Latin of the Vulgate, which put it into Jacobus, or with the Latinization of the I into a J, that still would sound as a Y, Jacobus, but written as a J, which still is very much similar to the Greek Jacobus. Well, we need to go to the early French, where there was a change in the consonant from B sound to an M sound, so that Jacobus became Jacomus, or with the J sound, Giacomus. And you understand why in Italian it's called Giacomo. But in French became gem or gem, okay, like this, gem. Well, from there, it was just a little leap to get to the English. You see, the je, the French je, gets the J in English, and you get the James. You see the very similarity between the two. So, very long way to get to a English version of a name that at the end of the story doesn't sound at all as the original name. Well, what about Santiago, you may ask? Why in Spanish do they know James as Santiago? Well, Santiago, let's write it here, is just a combination of Saint, Iago. And where does Iago comes from? Well, Iago is a shortening of Jacobus. Is Jaco that became Iago, right? So Iago is the shortening of Jacob, and then they put saint in front because it was a saint, so it became Saint Iago, so Santiago. There you have it. Now that we cleared up this problem of Jacobus versus James, we're going to keep calling him James because that's the tradition of the church. Nobody knows the sons of Zebedee to be John and Jacob, but to be John and James. Well, let's focus on his father, Zebediah. Well, that comes from a Hebrew name also, which sounded like Zevdi. Well, Zeved in Hebrew means gift, and that E sound at the ends of D can be interpreted as a possessive, meaning my gift, or a shortening for Yahweh. So Yahweh gives, gifts from Yahweh. So it's a beautiful name that is about gift, even a gift from God. So, and moving forward a little bit, Jesus saw James, the son of Zebedee, Kai Yohanan. Well, and John, you see the ending here, eta n is an accusative, okay? And then you have this ton, which is the same as this ton, which introduces the specification related to John. Who was John? He was ton adelphon. We already seen this term, means brother. Adelphos comes from the copulative alpha and delphus, which means womb. Okay, and the copulative alpha means together. Okay, so brothers are brothers because they share the same womb of their mother. So John was the brother autu, omicron. Upsilon is a genitive ending of the personal pronoun, third person singular. So, and John, the brother of him. So, and John, his brother. So, Jesus saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. Now, what it's interesting to notice here is that the way that Mark introduces James and John is very similar to the way he introduces Peter and Andrew. Remember that we commented on the fact that Jesus first saw Peter and Andrew. He said he saw Peter and Andrew, the brother of Peter. Here, more or less, you have the same idea. Jesus sees Giacomo, which is James, the son of Zebedee, and then his brother John, as if he were on a second level. And it's very interesting to notice that every time in the Gospel of Mark that James and John are referred together, this is the standard way they are referred. James first and John identified as brother of James. This is one of the reasons why, in general, people think that John was the younger brother. Okay, so first Mark gives the older brother, and then the younger brother is identified to be the smaller brother, the younger brother of the more important older brother. Same thing between Peter and Andrew. It's very likely that Andrew was the younger of the two. Now, who was Zebedee? And why is he even important? Well, sometimes the father was given, the name of the father was given to identify the person. And Jesus called Simon Peter many times with the name of his father, Simon, son of John. All right. Because all the names at that time didn't have in general last name. The last name was the name of the father. So to identify a person very clearly, you would also give the name of the father. This is one reason why Zebedee is mentioned here. The other reason is that, and we're going to see it next video, Zebedee was also very likely a very important person in terms of wealth. he was probably not just a fisherman. He had a business, and he probably was of a family that was middle high class. All right. So he was probably a very prominent figure among the very first disciple of Jesus. His wife, Salome, is believed to be one of the women that followed Jesus until the cross. So Zebedee and his family was one of the closest family to Jesus himself, one of the first family that believed in Jesus and followed him. And possibly Zebedee being and belonging to a middle high class type of family with some sort of wealth, it's very likely that he contributed financially to the financial needs of Jesus and his first disciples. Let's move on to the next part of the verse. Kai autus. Kai is the usual conjunction, and autus. We know that autus comes from the third person personal pronoun, but in this case, it's a plural and it's in the accusative case. You can see it from this ending omicron upsilon sigma. So masculine, plural. Why? Because it relates to both Jacobon and Joannen, both in the accusative case. So two singulars make one plural. So, and them. This is them. Okay. So he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, and them, meaning, and he saw them katartizantas. Let's jump to this verb. We already mentioned that this is a participle, okay, and this is a present participle. So they were doing something. They saw them doing something. What is this something? So let's analyze this verb because it's very important. The verb is katartizo. Katartizo. Think about English word that sound like katartizo, cathartic. When you have a cathartic experience, what is that? That is related to an experience that enlightens you and makes you feel perfect, makes you feel complete. Is a satisfying experience. That's the meaning of the English word cathartic. Okay, comes from the Greek kathartizo, which means to make perfect. So that's the idea of perfection, to make perfect. Now, in different contexts, it may mean slightly different things, right? If we apply this to man, it makes sense to use this idea of to make perfect. If you catartizo somebody, it's because you make that person perfect. But if you apply this to a thing, usually what that means is to fix or to adjust, okay? To correct, to make it perfect in the sense to fix it. Okay. So what were John and James doing here? They were katartizantas. They were fixing. They were adjusting. They were mending. Ta dictua. We already seen this in the previous verse. These are the nets. The nets. Okay. The nets. So this is the neuter plural. This alpha ending is the sign. This is a plural and is in the neuter gender. So they were mending, they were fixing, they were adjusting the nets. Where? En to ployo. We know this preposition en, which indicates position in a specific place. So in, and it wants the dative case, and you have it here, omega, your subscript, omega, your subscript. En to ployo. In the, ployos is the boat. So they were in their boat mending their nets. But why is Mark giving us this detail that they were mending, they were repairing their nets? Well, if they were repairing their nets, we need to assume that their nets somehow were broken. But from Mark, We don't know any better. We just know that when Jesus saw for the first time Peter and Andrew, they were amphibalantas, if you remember. They were basically dragging their nets on shore from the sea to the shore, washing the nets. But for James and John, Mark doesn't say they were washing their nets. He says they were repairing their nets, as if the nets had been broken. Well, if we read Mark, we will never understand this detail. But if we go and read Luke, then everything will become absolutely clear. Let's read from Luke chapter 5, verses 5 through 10. It's the same story. When he had finished speaking, Jesus, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we worked hard all night, haven't caught anything. Because you say so, I will let down the nets." And when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. There you have it. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. And when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. This is a perfect example, and the very first one appearing in the Synoptic Gospel, of undesigned coincidence. There's a detail in Mark that cannot be really explained within Mark. You need to jump to another gospel to find that piece of the puzzle that clicks in exactly and explain that detail. This type of undesigned coincidences that click together like a perfect puzzle are one of the most important and strongest evidence of the fact that these stories that are narrated in the gospels are not made up, because you couldn't made up stories creating details that click together that well. That's exactly what you would expect if the same story is told by two different eyewitnesses from two different point of views, but if the story is the same and real. This is exactly one of those occasions. There's this detail in Mark that is not immediately understandable in Mark, but if you read the story as Luke reports it, then it makes perfect sense. We know now that there was something in between that Mark does not reports on, which is the miraculous fishing. And now we understand why the nets were broken and needed to be mended and repaired. It's because they had caught so many fishes that the nets had broken. So while Jesus calls Andrew and especially Peter, and Peter breaks down in front of Jesus, at the same time, James and John were still on the boat and they were mending those nets that had broken down because of the weight of the fish. That's why Jesus, after calling Peter, has to walk forward a little bit to the boat where James and John were repairing the nets and say, "You don't need to do this job anymore. Come with."